Well, I am especially excited today. I have with me my very good longtime friend, Julius Anthony, who has done so many amazing things. I'm going to do a little share here to just give you an idea of some of the stuff he's been up to. Okay, so here we go. He has created what we call the Believe Project, and I'll let him tell you all about that. But this is just an amazing thing. I would mention that I have been to several of the installations. The two that I remember the most are the one at the Ferguson location, and that was yes, it's that Ferguson. Okay, so one at the Ferguson location, and then that one at the Ferguson location was about a mile and a half away from the building where I spent 20 years of my life teaching Title One, and that building is Woodland. And somehow or another, I don't have any idea how Julius ever got the idea of maybe putting a Believe project into Woodland, but he did. Thank you, Julius. And you'll find when you find out what is involved in a Believe room, you're just going to be blown away. So there's that, okay, to talk about. And then Julius is probably busier than I am, and that takes a lot. Okay, but this is just a couple of the things that he's done in just this week on Facebook. He's always somewhere. He's always doing something. He's always doing presentations and with major people and the rest. So with that introduction, Julius, it's going to be all you from this part forward. I know my audience is going to want to know a little bit about how you got to be who you are, and a little bit about the Believe Project, and a whole lot about what you're doing these days. So Julius, it's all you, and I'm going to stop this share, and I'm going to change the view so that it's all you. Go for it.
Well, first, let me say thank you, Sam, for inviting me to have this conversation. And let me say thank you for just being in my life. When you put up the photo of the last screen, that first picture of me and Donna Willis, she has been a long time early childhood mentor of mine. And it reminded me of how you have mentored me as well. And I tell everybody that really you are the person that sort of pushed me into leadership and the whole literacy world, becoming a part of the St. Louis Regional Literacy Association. Um, I just became a member, and then you just forced me to become part of the literacy. Forced me.
I'm sorry, Julius, does your arm still hurt from where I twisted?
Right.
Just wondering. Okay.
Right. No, but I so appreciate you giving me the courage, and just showing me the whole ecosystem of how what it was like, or what the expectation should be to be in leadership and the literacy landscape in St. Louis. So I'll always give you credit for that. And I'll always say thank you for that as well. So I want to just start there and saying thank you to you.
Well,
Um,
I'm going to return that favor by saying you are such a force now in the St. Louis region, and I'm hoping that what you're doing might eventually become a model for doing things on the national level. So thank you for everything you're doing. And by the way, Julius, how'd you get to be who you are?
well, I'm a native St. Louisan, so I want to start there and give acknowledgement to the community that I came from, which is the Jeff Vanderloo community here in St. Louis. And I do want to talk about, I will talk about St. Louis Black Authors of Children's Literature and the Believe Project. But I always start with just talking about the community that I came from, because I believe that all of that helped to inform the work that I do today. Because I grew up in a community where the adults literally were the people who migrated from the South to St. Louis and really created the Black community as we know it in St. Louis. And so, of course, St. Louis's Black community was part of the Black migration, which started at the turn of the 19th century, well, a little bit before then, and extended throughout the 1970s. And of course, all of those people that came in that early part of the migration weren't the people that raised me, but the people that did migrate here in the mid 40s on, those were the adults in the community that I was a part of. And most of those adults had large families. At that time, they were having 8 and 9 and sometimes 11 kids. And they raised their children in sets. And I happened to be at the end of those set of children. And so a lot of those people were older people, including my parents who had migrated here in the mid 40s. And the reason I acknowledge them is because they came to St. Louis looking for a better day as young people, and they believed in three principles: their faith, education, and family. And education for them was a promise. It was a promise to move their family and the families within the community forward. And they believed that that was a pathway to ensure that their families would thrive and that there would be a long-standing opportunity for their families from the people that raised them, that brought them, which is why they left the Jim Crow South, to come to St. Louis to have this better life in this place that we call America. And so I think all of the things that they taught me, all of the things that we experienced in those communities help inform this idea that I have around literacy, which is using literacy as a pathway and understanding that literacy is the basis for all learning. If we aren't competent human beings around literacy and really understanding that, then there is no connection to becoming thriving adults. And we know this to be true because universities have done that research, right, Sam?
Oh, yes.
All the universities have told us that if children on or above grade level in reading by the end of third grade, then they have a low potential of making it to 12th grade. And when they are on grade level by the end of third grade, there is a direct connection between third grade reading success and a person's ability to be a high achieving and thriving adult. Now, if that is true, then I think those people that raised me, that were part of that community, was onto something when they were thinking about this whole idea of education being a better way. And so when we look at literacy and we look at the capacity and who we are in St. Louis today, and we look at the community that I came from, which was all Black. It was all Black, and we look at the demography of St. Louis and this region, we know that in St. Louis, the demography is simply this: Black people typically live in the North Corridor of St. Louis City and the North Corridor of St. Louis County. It has always been that way. And it began again as a result of the migration from the South, the Black migration. And whites in this region live outside of that. They either live in the South Corridor of the city, West, and West County. But when we look at where Black children are in terms of their success rate around literacy, they tend to do not as well as white children do. And if we look at the zip code areas and we look at this race construct, Black children are constantly doing poor than white children. And it's come to the point now in St. Louis, you can now determine who will do well in school simply by race. And this is what I mean by that. For several years, for several generations now, we know that Black children score in terms of failing the state mandated assessments, particularly when it was instituted under the No Child Left Behind law, that Black children in St. Louis typically fail at third grade around the 70 to 75% rate. And this past year, only 14% of Black children passed or was proficient in literacy at the third grade level, which means that that's about 85% that failed that state mandated exam. And so it's getting worse. And we also know that in terms of the state and where all children are, only 51% of all children are passing. But when we look at where white children are in this region, we see that over 50% of white children at the rate of close to 60% are proficient readers at third grade. So when you look at 14% compared to 58% for white children, that's a huge gap. And when we look at where Black children are attending school, which is in the St. Louis Promise Zone school districts, all of those are within the North Corridor of St. Louis, the North Corridor of St. Louis County. The average rate, again, for all of them combined together in terms of proficiency rate is around 14, 15%. And then when we look at where Black children are doing in schools that are outside of that, in places like Kirkwood, Ladue, Clayton, they're all scoring at about the same rate. And you have to ask yourself why. Why is it that Black children that are scoring and at 14% at St. Louis Public or Jennings or Riverview are scoring at the same level in what you would consider a high achieving school like Clayton and Ladue? When Clayton and Ladue is supposed to have all of the resources, the better teachers, the better schools, the better internets and digital access to things. Why is it that Black children are still scoring at that rate? And when you look at what are the constants in terms of what's happening in both spaces, the only constant that we can see is the literature. And what do we mean by that? What we mean is the literature that is offered to all children in all schools, no matter where they're attending, is literature that is not representative of all cultures. That's the constant. Because everything else supposedly operates the same when it comes to instruction. Now, we know that that's typically not totally true. But when we look at the literature, we do know for a fact that according to the white paper that we got from the International Literacy Association, all children in America only have access to literature that have BIPOC information or stories is less than 6%. And so that's the constant that we see. And then we see this other research that's coming out of historically Black colleges that are telling us when Black children have access. When we look at the literature, the research of Gloria Lasson's Billings and Rudine Sims, when we look at the research of Goldie Muhammad and the guy that wrote Ratchetdemics, his name is escaping me at this moment. When we look at these thought leaders, these educational thought leaders, they're telling us that when Black children have access to literature that reflects their everyday lives and experiences, and I'm going to quote one more. When we go to the U.S. Department of Education's website, they even will note for you that culturally responsive literature is a pathway for children to become literate. They acknowledge it. That when they have this access, they do better. They become readers. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you here for a moment because what you were saying is fascinating. And first of all, I want you to assure me that you will be sending me the links for those researchers you mentioned.
I will.
Okay, okay. And secondly, I want to make it clear, and you're about to, of what you're up to in terms of getting the uh, literature to the children, and what you're doing is just amazing. And the final thing is, I spent a lot of my career in the very area you're talking about, and we found exactly what you finding that we were using methods that some people are thinking is, hey, it's all about teaching the right phonics. Well, okay, on the one hand, phonics is important and it's a big thing, and yes, you should be doing that. But it's also about several other things, and I've been writing about those for quite a while. And it's exactly the kind of thing that you're mentioning, that making sure that children have access to the kind of literature that reflects them, and that is so very important. So I think there are a lot of people in the audience that think, oh, if you just teach them enough phonics, everything's going to be fine. That isn't how it works. And I'll do a little personal note here that since I taught in one of those buildings for a long time, that we were highly successful, and it wasn't because of the phonics program. It was, although we were doing phonics, it was mainly because of the access that we were giving to the children to various forms of literature and thinking about that literature. So I want to say, I love what you said about, well, let's go in and find those schools where it's working and try to figure out why. And I like that approach because that's kind of the positive. The final thing is be very, very careful with the word proficiency, and we'll have a discussion about that another day. But there's something about something about the use of that word proficiency that it's being misused. And I haven't had that conversation with you yet, but I need to have that conversation with you about uh, what some of these proficiency things are about, and that's a whole nother blog.
Well, I
Okay,
totally agree with that, and we don't have to go down a rabbit hole.
yeah,
So with that, but I'm on that page with you, and I'll get to the Believe projects really quickly because I'm
okay, yeah, let's jump to that then. Great.
yeah, because yes, reading is more than just the access to the literature. Reading is about what we see in our entire world around us. We define reading as listening, speaking, viewing, visual expression, reading, and writing. And if that is the case, then we have to be proficient in all of those things, right? Not just the text that we see in the book. We have to be proficient in all those other ways as well. So we won't go down that rabbit hole, but essentially that's what the Believe Project is designed to do. It's designed to ensure that children are building skills in all of those 6 ways of literacy, and from a culturally responsive perspective, simply meaning that learning for all children is nuanced. Nuanced in the sense that you have to not just consider the intellectual aspect of how we learn, but you have to also consider the social and the emotional aspect of how we learn. And if you're considering the social and emotional, then you must connect to the cultural, because that's where we live our lives in a cultural context, meaning that you living in somebody's home, you coming from somebody's culture, somebody's parent, and that's culture. And so that's what the Believe Project is all about. So what is that? We build these spaces in schools, and these spaces are designed exactly like that, to look like someone's home. And that's a strategy that's intentional. We want children to understand that what you do in this space, you can do at home, and that this space is a cultural experience, because that's where our learning begins before we even walk in the big building. Learning begins at home. And so in that space, you're going to have furniture that looks just like the furniture you have at your house. The only difference might be the furniture is all new. It is colorful. It is bright. So you'll see couches, chairs, and you'll see even a dining area. Also, you'll see in this space lots of art, and that's intentional because we know that in our culture, art is very important to us, and art is important to literacy. Art is a form of literacy. And so on one wall, you will see a wall that's totally dedicated to a mural where children will see themselves in life-size characters. They will show their diversity in skin tone, hairstyle, dress, and aspirational words. And we work with local artists to create what we call a Believe exhibit in the space, where there is art pieces that reflect what we believe will be the possibilities for children to imagine themselves as or to be. And that is one of the most powerful, I believe, experiences in the space. And based on data, it has been the most powerful experience for teachers. Now we haven't figured out yet for the children. The children like the bears and the books. The teachers have seemed to respond really to the artwork in the space. So speaking of the bears, we have a great relationship with Build-A-Bear Foundation, and they donate Believe Build-A-Bears as reading buddies for the children. Because as we said, speaking is a form of literacy. It gives children an opportunity to actually have conversation to bears, which helps them in the reading process, because we know that language has to be practiced, not just as we read, but as we go along in our everyday life. And so they practice talking to these bears, and then they practice reading to the bears on their own, through their own initiative. And then we start the labs with 1,000 books, and then we add books each year. The goal or the hope is to get up to 3,000 books in every space. Layered on top of that, we bring in national authors to St. Louis because we want our children to have access to authors who are winning the national awards like the Caldecotts, the Newberries. We want our children to know who those authors are, who are writing the great stories that reflect them. So we bring them and we pair them with local hip hop artists, spoken word artists, and we do these really big shows so that we can build joy around the books that these artists are reading, and children get copies of those authors' books. And then we work with local authors. Local authors will go into the schools and they do author visits, and they get copies of those local authors' books. We've just instituted a new program where we're doing guest readers. And anybody that's listening to this podcast, we're looking for guest readers to join us, to sign up and volunteer with this program. Basically, the guest readers go into the schools twice a month, and they spend an hour doing read-alouds and follow-up activities. And we're focusing, every school has a different grade that we're focusing on, but most of them are focusing on first grade. And we do all of this in an effort to make sure kids are on grade level by third grade.
Okay, I'd really like to get to the super meat of this. How many sites do you have now?
So we have 3 preschool sites. We will be opening our 14th elementary school site on December 2nd. So you have a scoop there, Sam, that hasn't been publicly announced, so you're the first to get it. On Tuesday, December 2nd, we will be opening Believe 14, our 14th elementary school. And we just opened our first middle school last month. So that adds up to 18 Believe sites. And
let me get this straight. 18 rooms with at least 1,000 books, and some of them are now getting to the 2,000 or 3,000 level, with all this wonderful space. And I'm going to make it a point to put some pictures at the end of the video, if I possibly can, of what the sites look like and a link to what they look like. So, and that is just amazing.
Yeah.
I am overwhelmed, and so is everyone else. So I think you've got a model here that could go national so very easily. But I think we're getting to that point where you might want to think about what's the last things you want to say, anything you haven't hit yet. But I hope my listeners are hearing the size and scope of this project and how many children you're reaching, and the fact that every one of these places has this room that's a full-size classroom with all these wonderful things in it, including all the books, and the children have access to it. So, gosh, this is just a dream kind of project. So that said, anything you want to say to finish it up?
Sure. I just want to add that we also launched this year a preschool program called Believe Projects Preschool Review, where we'll be working with 35 preschool programs, building many Believe centers and doing all the same work with those preschools. And these are preschool programs that typically don't get touched by other early childhood programs, trying to make sure that kids are entering kindergarten ready to read so that they too can become readers by the end of third grade. So I just want to put that out there as well. And so, again, the whole goal is it's really important that all kids um, make it to third grade reading. Every child has a right to see themselves in the literature that they are exposed to or have access to in school. Every child has a right to see themselves and to learn more about themselves in the school experience. And when that does not happen, kids disconnect, and we don't want that to happen. Our society becomes better, more improved, when all people are literate and are readers. And so that's our goal, and that's what we do.
And amen to that. So I think we're now at that point in the Bommarito uh, interview where we do a Zoom wave goodbye. So we put on our biggest smiles and we're going to wave our hand. And but before I finish that Zoom wave goodbye, I'm going to say this is not the last time we're going to talk, and we're going to do some more follow-up things on some of the stuff you're doing. But thank you so much. So goodbye, Julius.
Bye bye. Thank you.